So here we are, chapter 5, Beginner's Brainstorm. And what we're going to do is, before we get started, we're going to talk about what a brainstorm is. Is it like a storm raging in your brain, like thunder and lightning and all that good stuff? No, it's ideas that are like swirling around in your brain, and you've got to find a way to get those ideas out. A lot of time what we do is we use graphic organizers, which are like pictures to be able to get you to write down what your ideas are. And sometimes we draw pictures, sometimes we write words. It all depends on which way we go that time. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be thinking about how we brainstorm, and we're going to listen in as to what a beginner brainstorm is. And then we're going to give you a little assignment at the end. So let's listen. Did you have a nice weekend? I asked Og when my cage was back on the table on Monday morning. Boing, boing, he said. He sounded cheerful, but I'm sure he missed me. We started the day with language arts. We were studying words that sounded exactly the same, but can have many different meanings when they are spelled differently. Mrs. Brisbane wrote the word for them on the board. Homonyms. I hope that word is never on a spelling quiz. These are words such as grown and grown, or 8 and 8. Mrs. Brisbane also wrote funny sentences on the board. The monkey ate 8 bananas. Or the boat store had a sail. These words can be pretty funny if you get them mixed up. For instance, if you heard someone say, "Don't touch the hair on my head," you might think they were saying, "Don't touch the hair," H-A-R-E, like the bunny hair, on my head. But that would only make sense if the person happened to have a rabbit on the top of his head. Humans have a pretty funny language, and it's a lot more complicated than squeak, squeak, squeak. Mrs. Brisbane said there was a quiz coming up, so I made sure to write down all the words. To, T-W-O, to, T-O-O, blue, B-L-U-E, blue, B-L-E-W, beat, B-E-T, B-E-E-T, and beat, B-E-A-T. Hurry up, Harry raised his hand. I have one more for you, he said. My dog told the flea to flee. Get it? F-L-E-A, the bug flea, to flee, F-L-E-E, to go away. Mrs. Brisbane liked that one. I did too. Harry has a good imagination. She also gave us an assignment to come up with a sentence using homonyms for our own. Then we moved on to science. I already knew about gravity, but now Mrs. Brisbane talked about force and mass. I was unsqueakably confused when she talked about pushing and pulling and weight. Weight and weight would be a good one for our quiz. After lunch came the part of the day I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Brisbane asked my friends to open their writing journals. I couldn't wait to hear how my friends had used their imaginations to make their writing even better. If I could fly like a speeding jet, I'd go to Winfield to see my friend Phoebe every day because I miss her so much, Holly read. We'd do all our favorite things. We'd pretend to be rock stars and sing along to our favorite songs. We'd play Monopoly and make smoothies, and we'd make friendship bracelets because we're best friends. My parents said I can go visit Phoebe on spring break, but I wish I didn't have to wait. I wish she didn't have to wait either. I love Thomas's story about going to 3 football games in one day and Simon's description of all kinds of yummy Italian food. Cassie wrote, "If I could fly like a soaring seagull, I'd fly to the nearest ocean and sit on the beach. The only sounds I'd hear would be the crashing waves and the cries of the other seagulls. It would be a peaceful place." I think even calm down Cassie, who is very excitable, would be calm there. But I think I'd have trouble relaxing with those seagulls around me with their sharp beaks. Thank you, Cassie, Mrs. Brisbane said. It's important to write about something you'd really like to do. That's why your paragraph is coming along so well. And don't forget to keep adding more details. Joey, on the other paw, still seemed to be having trouble with his paragraph as I was. Mrs. Brisbane was encouraging, and Joey said he'd try again. Why did everyone in class have a good imagination except Joey and me? Then Mrs. Brisbane read from the Dragon book again. When Gil Goodfriend asked why he was chosen to help, Goldie said, "Because of your invention." Gil was puzzled. Goldie continued, "We have a very good view of Bumpshire from our cloud. We saw the amazing machine you built to turn snow into ice cream. We have never seen something so clever. Anyone who can figure that out is the person to help us." He explained that the dragons had discovered an ancient book that held the secrets of how the last dragon war had been won, but there was a big problem. The instructions were hidden in codes and riddles that the dragons couldn't figure out. "Are you listening, Og?" I squeaked to my neighbor. "Codes and riddles." Og didn't make a sound. I think he was waiting to hear what happened next. Mrs. Brisbane turned the page and continued. "If you can solve the riddles and work out the codes, we can use special swords and shields to make magic that only works in the sky," Goldie said. "You are our only hope." Mrs. Brisbane's eyes grew wide as she read the next part. Gil's hands trembled as he opened the book. I think my paws were trembling too. Gil worked for days to figure out most of the codes and many of the riddles, but the most important discovery he made was this. The secret to controlling the dragons was to speak backwards. So the last part of the sentence would read, "Draw cab, caps, at saw, snowguard, et Gildork Turks at." It was funny hearing Mrs. Brisbane trying to read that. From then on, when he commanded the bad dragon to stop the lightning or hail or whatever horrible weather they were creating, he said it backwards. That, combined with the magic shield, made everything the evil dragons did reverse direction and strike their own cloud. By the time Gil left, the bad dragon's village was frozen solid. Cameron Cole, the author, must have a brain overflowing with imagination. Castles, codes, shields, and secrets. But the sad thing was, we were almost at the very end of the book. Sophie stayed after school to ask Mrs. Brisbane a question. "I have some more ideas about the island with the parrots." I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Is it all right if I write more than one paragraph?" Now, what do you think Mrs. Brisbane's going to say? "Of course! But make sure everything you write fits in and is important," Mrs. Brisbane replied. "I will," Sophie said, "because I had this dream about parrots, I told you." "Yes," Mrs. Brisbane said as she turned toward the door. Sophie turned too. "I've never had a parrot because, well, my parents said I'd have to wait," Sophie continued. "Uh-huh," our teacher said, walking toward the door. Sophie walked with her. "But I'd love to hear them talk," Sophie said. "I'd like a dog, but they don't talk." Mrs. Brisbane nodded and opened the door. "Put it in your paragraph," she said, "and have a nice evening." Sometimes, even I'm surprised by our teacher. She'd manage to be a good listener and also make sure Sophie didn't miss her bus, all at the same time. Once the parking lot was empty, I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and slipped under the door. I couldn't wait to hear how Gigi's weekend had gone. Since it was still early, she was awake. "Oh, Humphrey, I was hoping you would come," she said. I raced toward the table and looked up. "Did you have a good time?" I asked. "Yes," Gigi exclaimed. "I had the best time ever. The humans were so nice, and they talked to me and played with me all weekend. And they were very gentle." "I told you so," I squeaked. "Now I'll never be worried about going home with a student," she continued. "Nothing scary could happen to me." "Nothing scary? How about an invisible bear? Or maybe even a ghost?" I decided not to tell Gigi about my weekend. "Now you see how much fun it is to be in a classroom pet," I said. I glanced up at the big clock on the wall. "Oops, I've got to get back to room 26. Aldo will be there any minute." "Come see me again, Humphrey," Gigi called after me. I got back to my cage a few minutes before Aldo arrived. "I got an A on my test," he shouted when the lights came on. "The best grade in the class." "Congratulations," I squeaked. "Boing, boing, boing, boing," Og said in his twangy voice. Aldo took a bow. "Thank you, my friends. And now, time to get to work." I always enjoy watching Aldo at work. He always does things in the same order. Dusting, sweeping, emptying the wastebaskets. He never forgets to sweep the corners of the room and underneath every desk. Sometimes he balances his broom on one finger. That's his favorite trick. But that night, he amazed me by leaning his head back and balancing the broom on his chin. That's talent. Aldo always does the best job he possibly can. I try to do the same in my job as classroom pet, but I wasn't doing very good at my job on writing. If Mrs. Brisbane had to give me a grade on my paragraph, she wouldn't give me an A or a B or even a C, and that made me feel BAD, 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 bad. When Aldo was gone, I got out my notebook and looked at what I'd written. If I could fly, I'd fly like a speedy flying squirrel all over the world. Now, is that so bad what he has so far? I don't think so. Let's keep going. I sighed. It wasn't any good, but even worse, it wasn't really true, and Mrs. Brisbane had told us to write about something we'd really like to do. I would not like to be a squirrel, not even a flying squirrel. I love being a hamster. Maybe only humans have imaginations, I thought. But at Philippe's house, I'd imagined I'd seen a ghost, when all I'd seen was Philippe's nice mother in a white robe. That took a lot of imagination. So, if I could imagine bad things, why couldn't I imagine good things? I stared and stared at the page until I heard a loud rumbling sound. Boing, 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 Og said in a worried tone. The rumble was followed by a loud crash. Og hopped around his tank. Boing! I was too scared to squeak. Suddenly, rain began pelting the window next to our table. A bright flash lit up the room, followed by another loud crash. It was a thunderstorm. I don't like thunderstorms, but at least I knew what was making all that noise. At first I thought the rumbling was in my brain. I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and headed over to Og's tank. Og, it's all right. It's just a thunderstorm. You know what they're like. Og stopped hopping and stared at me with his big bulging eyes. Who knows what he's thinking, but he finally said, boing. I was pretty sure he understood me. Gigi might not know how noisy thunderstorms sound in these classrooms when you're all alone. She's probably afraid, I said. Will you be all right if I leave for a few minutes to see how she's doing? Og stared at me again, but his head moved a little. It was almost like a nod. Boing, he agreed. Soon I was scurrying down the hallway again. All the rumbling, crashing, and flashing of lights made my whiskers wiggle, but I didn't turn back. Once I was in room 12, I raced toward Gigi's cage. I figured she wasn't sleeping this time. Gigi? I squeaked at the top of my lungs, but there was a huge crash that rattled the windows, and I don't think she heard me. So I grabbed the cord and swung up, and leaped on the table. Gigi, it's all right, I said. It's a thunderstorm. It's part of nature, like we are. My friend was huddling in the corner. I think she was shaking. Don't be afraid, I said. Even though the thunder made my small ears throb, it won't last long, and it won't hurt you. Are you sure? She softly squeaked. Pretty sure, I replied. After all, I had to be honest. I'll stay here with you until it goes away. It wasn't long before the crashes sounded farther away and the flashes of light weren't as bright. See? I said. It's moving on. The rain continued, but after a few minutes, there was no more thunder and lightning. Thank you for staying with me, Gigi said. You're a good friend. Anytime, Gigi, I answered. You're a good friend, too, but I better see how Og is doing. I hope to meet him someday. Tell him I said hello. I'll do it, I said as I slid down the table leg and headed back to room 26. Og, are you all right? I asked when I got back to our table. I guess he was, because he was swimming around in the water side of his tank. Gigi said to say hello, I told him, and she hopes to meet you someday. Just then, Og leaped up out of the water and said, boing! I guess he wanted to meet Gigi too, but how could a frog in a tank and a guinea pig with a lock that doesn't lock ever come face to face? I rested for a while, and after a snack and a nice drink of water, I opened my notebook again. That thunderstorm had really rattled my brain. In fact, I'd felt the thunderstorm was in my brain, like a brainstorm, and a brainstorm was just what I needed. Mrs. Brisbane had said to write about things we'd like to do. She also said to write down any idea that came into our heads without stopping. So I wrote this down. Things I like to do. I took a deep breath, and then there was a rumbling in my brain. Under that heading, I wrote, be a classroom pet. Help my friends with their problems. Go to my friends' houses. Go to all kinds of interesting places. Help my teacher with her problems. Have adventures outside my cage. Meet new friends. Try new things. Visit old friends like Phoebe. Help everybody with their problems. My paw was getting tired, so I stopped and read what I'd written. It was pretty clear that I liked to have adventures and help my friends. If I could combine those two things, I'd be unsqueakably happy. Og, I think I had a brainstorm, I squeaked, or at least a brain shower. Boing, boing, Og sounded cheerful. And a brain shower is a start, I added. And that's the end of the chapter. Now here's his ramblings. At first there was some drizzle, and then a lot of rain. Then finally I had it, a big storm in my brain. So that's the end of that chapter. So my question to you is, what kind of brainstorm are you having today? And could you relate to anything that Humphrey said? So he said that he liked to have adventures. He liked to help his teacher with problems. He liked to go to his friends' houses. How about any of those? So what I want you to do is I want you to create a list today, and I don't want you to even stop to think and wonder. Get some ideas in your head and then put it on paper. What are some of the things that you like to do? Give yourself a little time to do that, and I cannot wait to hear the list of things that you like to do.